Hello, and welcome to episode 213 of The Modern Manager. I'm your host, Mamie Canfor Stewart. Now, today's guest is Demir Bentley. Demir teaches hard-hitting efficiency techniques and proven accountability strategies that have helped clients generate millions in revenue while saving thousands of hours. In the past 8 years, he's helped more than 50,000 professionals, including executives from Facebook, Google, Uber, and PepsiCo, helping them prevent burnout and create more freedom in their lives. And Demir's advice has been highlighted in Forbes, Bloomberg, Entrepreneur, and more. Demir and I talk about the number one routine you should do every week to exponentially improve your productivity, that weekly planning session. We get into how to do it, when to do it, and what makes it so powerful. Now here's the conversation. Thank you so much for joining me today, Demir. I'm really excited to talk about rituals and the kind of daily planning and the calendar management and all of that stuff that's supposed to help us, I think, be more productive, but maybe sometimes doesn't always help us be more productive. But I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, me too. Thanks for having me on.
All right, so let's start with this idea of the daily rituals, because as we were preparing for this call, when I brought this topic up, you're like, yes, because this is something that people just maybe get wrong a lot. So can you share this little insight about what are these daily rituals? Why do we need them? What's happened to them? And what are we supposed to do with them?
Yeah, so I'll zoom out a little bit and just talk about the productivity / personal development landscape. I don't think anybody in this landscape that I've met has any malintent. But what has happened is it's devolved into what I call a very fractured or atomized productivity, personal development space where everybody, it's really easier to break through the space when you sort of take one small idea and you run with it. You make it seem as if that small idea is everything, right? So Atomic Habits or the 5-second rule. And I love these authors and I love these ideas, but the net effect of everybody grabbing one small idea and sort of magnifying it as if it's the most important thing in your productivity is you sort of get a population of people who sort of say, well, which of these 10,000 ideas is the most important idea? And what we've done recently is sloshed over towards this fetishism around daily routines. And you name it, morning routines, meditation routines, evening routines, it's just become this fetishization of if I could just get the right daily routine, well, then everything else would fall into place. And let me be the first person to give you the bad news that is really not the end of the bat that you want to be swinging from.
Well, why? What's so bad about all these routines? Aren't they supposed to help us get in the right mindset and help us get our day in order and all those things that are going to make us more productive?
Yeah. So it's not that there's anything bad about it. It's really more that that's the wrong way to enter this space and start thinking about it. Because again, when people come to me, it's weird, Mamie, they often have read more books on productivity than even I have, right? I mean, these people are not starting from zero. They've made huge efforts. But the problem is the more that they read, the more they get confused. They're not converging towards a clearer understanding or a workflow that works for them. They're actually getting more and more and more confused, which puts them more and more and more into inaction. Or worse, they did actually give everything to starting the right daily routine, but it sort of didn't work. It didn't change the game like it was supposed to. So if I can give you an analogy here that everybody can draw from, you want to think about your workflow. Forget the word productivity. I don't like that much. Let's think about workflow. Workflow is the big umbrella term for everything in your productivity. It's just how everything flows from Monday when you get up all the way through Friday when you hang up your Spurs, right? Workflow. And if you think about workflow, you want it to feel like riding a bike. And just like riding a bike, in the beginning, riding a bike often feels like 10 skills in one because it really is. Your brain is thinking, okay, hold on to the handlebars, don't let go, but you also have to steer with your hands and you're navigating with your eyes and you're trying to keep balance with your core, but you also have to pedal with your legs. I mean, it really is like you're doing 10 things at once. And so no wonder it's confusing and it's disoriented. And sometimes we fall down in the beginning. But very quickly, it starts to converge into one experience, which is simply riding a bike. And people who haven't even ridden bikes maybe for 5-10 years can still get on a bike and they don't talk about it as all of its composite skills. They just talk about it as simply, well, I rode the bike from here to there, meaning disparate skills converged into one. That's really where you want your productivity workflow to be for you and for your team. You want it to feel like one experience, simply winning your week. Getting on the bike, rolling through your week, and everything converges. The problem with atomized productivity cultures where we obsess about, say, morning routines or how we run our day in some atomized way is that it's pulling our focus from the totality of our workflow and everything converging together and just feeling easier to an obsession over the micro at the expense of the macro.
Makes a lot of sense. And I can understand why, we're trying to plug all of these individual components together to make our days be more efficient, to make ourselves be more focused. And it feels like so much work to do that. And then it ends up not getting us the benefits we want. So, what else are we supposed to do, right? If these things aren't working in isolation and they're such a heavy lift and we're getting them wrong and they're not getting the payoff, then what's the alternative approach? Because we still all need to be productive. We still need to learn all these skills and these, individual components as you described them to be able to have that workflow, to be able to ride the bike seamlessly.
Yeah, so this is an interesting, we just jumped really to the meat and potatoes of why we even started our company. And it's funny, we just wrote a book, but we've been in business for 10 years and often have said, there's not a need for more books. We don't need more ideas in the productivity space. What we need is more integration. And so when we started Lifehack Method, we thought of ourselves less as researchers and more as clinicians, right? And so if you follow that analogy, we were less trying to break new ground in productivity and more trying to bring what we had already with the ground that had already been broken, the amazing innovative ideas and concepts and technologies, and bring them to people in a way that they could actually yield the benefit in their life. So often what we do when we're coaching with people is we're really showing them a very simplified system that integrates all of this and help them navigate the process of integrating it. So this is the very light version, but we have a 4-step process. The first step is getting radical clarity. So before you integrate habits, techniques, technologies, we really just focus on, do you know where you're going? Do you have radical clarity? If you could only do one thing and that one thing would win the game, what would that be? So if that's step one, we always start there with the client, almost on a blank sheet of paper. Step 2 is more self-mastery. And this is where a lot of the traditional productivity techniques come in. And we like to think that one of the benefits that we lend to our clients is we're not just telling them what they should be doing, we're telling them all the things that they shouldn't, because it's such a crowded space. Your friend at a party and you go to a party, you're going to come away with 10 different productivity techniques and 10 different recommendations for books. So in stage 2, when we're helping people self-mastery, one of the ways that we serve people is to say, hey, all of that stuff you can disregard. This is what's really going to make an impact. Simplified, let's start doing this. And people see a result. Stage 3 that we take people through then is assuming you've got clarity, assuming you've got some level of self-mastery, meaning your productivity hygiene is dialed in. Then we talk about using technology and systems to magnify your output. This is where we would get people into delegation or, automation, some more of the fancy stuff that really magnifies your productivity so that you can do the work of 10 people. And then stage 4, which we could talk about maybe later, is really lifestyle design. Is all of this adding up to the life that you really want to be living? So just to quickly recap, stage 1 would be getting radical clarity. Stage 2 is all of the productivity basics. Stage 3 would be systematizing your life and leveraging, really breaking through the boundaries of productivity using technology and other people. And then stage 4 is it leading you to the lifestyle you really want to be living? And so that's the arc that we travel with people in a sort of, I know this sounds silly to say in productivity, in our clinical work.
I love that phrasing. And it's, I might start to adopt that kind of mindset or that kind of phrasing with my work too, because that's very similar to the way that I approach work with my clients. So I actually want to go to step 2 a little bit more, and this self-mastery, this, figuring out what are the right behaviors or routines or practices for yourself. Is it something that's kind of across the board? There are a few things that everyone should do, and we're kind of good to go. And anything around that is like, fancy for the edges. Or is it really individualized per person? And how do you then figure out what are the right things for you to do based on your personality, your role, whatever it is that might be those factors?
Yeah, this is an incredible question. I mean, I'll even take a step back so people know, it's actually important to know who I am to answer this question. So about 15 years ago, I was working in Wall Street. And just so you know, Mamie, I'm the kind of person who is successful sort of in spite of my productivity, not because of it. My mother recently laughed so hard that she spit Coca-Cola out of her nose, trying to explain to her friends that that I was the son who became the productivity coach. That concept was so funny to her because I was the, least productive child that she had. And so I really, although I was smart and I got into a good school, I usually had to work 80 hours to get 40 hours of work done. And I just foreground that to say, hey, you're talking to somebody who has tremendous empathy for people who are smart and maybe have been able to finagle their way into a successful position, but they know they've done so really in spite of their productivity habits and their basics that they've done or not done, not because of it. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. I'm thinking about my own children right now and hoping that they'll turn around maybe like you did.
Yeah, I mean, so what happened to me is I was working Wall Street, was working 80 hours a week and had a health crisis that nearly killed me. And it was sort of a forced stricture where from the outside, my doctor said, hey, you've got to stop working over 40 hours a week. You could actually die from what you're suffering from right now. And so that really forced me to step back. And instead of just reading productivity books or, engaging in the productivity fetishism that we all do, it really forced me to step back and focus on integration and say, okay, what I actually know, what is actually going to get the biggest impact? So coming back to your question of like, what on the foundations of productivity have the biggest impact? When I went home from my doctor that day, I'm talking about, I saw a doctor on a Friday. They said I had to go from working 80 hours a week to 40 hours a week, pretty much overnight. That very next week. So I went home, and the very first thing is I had what I call my first real planning session of my life. And I call it my first real planning session because previously I had been doing something that wore the clothes of planning, but was not actually planning. And what I mean by that is there's a very specific, in fact, in our book that's coming out, shameless plug there, we've actually got 5 discrete steps. If you take any one of those steps out of that process, you're not actually doing a planning. You're doing sort of something that very much, barks and quacks like planning, but it really isn't a planning process. So I would say for anybody, and I get asked this question at parties all the time. Okay, you're a productivity coach. What's the number one thing I need to be doing? I always say planning your week. Now, I just want to pause here maybe and say that almost everybody says, well, I plan. Okay, let's put some data in here. I surveyed 5,000 professionals who manage between 5 and 50 people, very much like your audience, right? People who manage other people. So let's just assume that if you're put in charge of somewhere between 5 and 50 other people, you're successful. You know how to work. You've distinguished yourself, right? So these are not unproductive people. These are not losers. We surveyed them about what they thought the most important productivity tactics were to win your week, meaning what's the most important thing that you have to do to win your week? 94% of them said that planning your week ahead of time was crucial to winning your week. I think everybody out there is probably nodding like, okay, duh, this is an obvious statement. But here's where things get interesting. We followed up with those 5,000 people. We said, okay, if planning is so important, how many times in the last 4 weeks, or have you planned your week for the last 4 weeks? We just wanted to get a sense, maybe, of out of these 5,000 people, who has a regular planning practice in place? Do you want to take a guess what that percentage was?
Like 30%?
Less than 1%.
What?
Now, not to say that nobody had not planned, but less than 1% had planned all 4 of the last 4 weeks where we had surveyed them, right? So less than 1% had a consistent planning practice in place. So often when I bang the drum about planning your week, people say, well, Demir, come on, man. I'm not talking to you for the simple stuff. I know the simple stuff. Give me the advanced stuff. But here's the thing. Are you doing this thing? What I have found through this survey and through work with my clients is planning your week is something that everybody gives lip service to. But when you actually scratch beneath the surface, hardly anybody is actually doing.
Yeah. I mean, I see the same thing with meetings. Everyone knows you should have an agenda, and so few people actually create one, right? It's the same concept that you got to plan so that you can focus your work, focus your conversations, focus your energy and your time on the things you're trying to accomplish. So why don't people actually follow through with planning? Or like, why are we not doing this thing that we know we should do? And like, how can we get ourselves to actually go do the planning and do it in a way that is going to really help us and not just, be going through the motions?
That's the essential question, right? How is it that we know there's something we have to do and yet we're not doing it? It actually makes perfect sense when you think of us less as rational actors who are having emotion and more as emotional actors who have the capacity every once in a while to act rationally, right? So if you think about us as an animal, not as a human being, right? Or you think about our animal self, our animal brain is designed to move us away from pain and towards pleasure, right? That's an oversimplification, but it's a helpful simplification. And so what is planning if not one of the least comfortable 30 minutes of your week? I mean, when you really think about it, to plan your week correctly, you're accelerating a week's worth of stress, fear, anxiety, and negative realizations into 30-minute sessions. That's going to be an incredibly uncomfortable 30 minutes, right? That's the 30 minutes where you discover, oh my God, I'm double booked. That's the 30 minutes where you discover, oh my God, that huge project is coming down the pipeline, right? And so let me say something controversial. Even when done perfectly right, a planning session is going to induce stress, fear, and anxiety. I think people think that there's some way to plan their week where, oh, if I'm planning my week correctly, then I will feel great about it. No, actually, planning done perfectly right will induce some level of stress, fear, and anxiety. And if you play that cycle through enough, by adulthood, many of us have somewhere between a very negative to an almost violent revulsion to planning. And you might still be saying in your logic brain, I want to plan, but your animal brain is firmly in the camp of this is negative. This stresses us out. This makes us feel terrible on our weekend. And even when you allocate the time, people find somehow miraculously they slip out of it. They evade it. They avoid it.
All right, so now we know why we're trying to avoid it. So what do we do then? How do you build your routine so that you do this weekly planning? And then what are the most important things that we should do, right? I heard you say 30 minutes maximum. So what do we do in those 30 minutes?
Yeah, I mean, let me step back and say, if we put the pain that you experience from planning your week on a scale, and on 10 on that scale, let's talk about the worst stomach flu you've ever had. Right. So let's call that 10. And let's call one like a painful sort of pebble in your shoe. Right. If that's your pain scale, let's call planning your week like maybe a 2 or a 3. So let's also get real. Like this is not the most painful thing that you could experience. Right. So yes, it creates stress, fear, and anxiety, but it's sort of a low grade stress, fear, and anxiety. It can easily be overcome if you have the right reward in place. So I'll sort of back up and say, one of the things that my wife and I discovered is that when we actually do a planning session that is rewarding in and of itself, we go down to a cafe, this really fancy brunch place. We go Saturday morning, we get a babysitter, we go by ourselves, we sit down, we plan our week for 30 minutes. We sort of, consult with each other. Okay, I just did my plan. You've done your plan. We sort of cross consult. Okay, what do you know that I need to know? What do I know that you need to know? And then we sit there for another hour and a half and 2 hours. And we found that it's way better than date night. It's actually so much better than date night because, well, first of all, we can get babysitting for it. But the second thing is that we feel really connected. And after we get a plan in place and we know that we've sort of faced our fears and looked at the week, there's actually a rush that comes after that. And many people who have planned can recall, they can summon to mind a feeling of like, yeah, it was hard to get myself there, but actually I felt so good on the other side, sort of almost a release or a rush that you get from having faced your fears. And when you do that together with your spouse or your business partner, it actually is multiplied. You get this sort of connectedness on the other side of it. So our reward that makes us want to go is that we've sort of treated ourselves to this incredibly luxurious brunch with the promise that it's like, hey, you can do this if you do your planning. And so it's really not hard to get yourself to overcome a 3 out of a 10 scale of pain if you induce yourself with the right reward.
I love that. And I'm also imagining it could apply to a team where everyone together on Monday morning hops on a Zoom, does their independent work, gets to like share and bounce ideas off of each other. And you can kind of walk away after, 30 or 45 minutes feeling more connected to your team members, knowing everyone's got their plan in place for the week and have it not feel heavy-handed. Like as a manager, I am coming down from the top saying, I need to know what you're doing this week.
Yeah, I mean, this could be something we could talk about in your bonus session for your paid subscribers. But Monday is the very worst time that you could be planning and having your team plan their week.
Yeah, let's stay on what's the right structure of planning. And then in our bonus section, we'll talk about why not Monday, what's the best time, and any other tips for how to do it collectively as a team.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, When I think about planning, one of the things we've worked to do is create something. And this is actually the substance of our book that's coming out. It's called Winning the Week: How to Plan Your Week Successfully to Win the Week in Less than 30 Minutes. And so that's the promise. And we want to show people a radically simplified process that you can do in less. It's 5 steps. It takes less than 30 minutes. And it's sort of like taking the medicine, right? We've really gotten the pill as small as you could possibly swallow it. And so that's what we fancy is the innovation here. Not that this is something you never could have imagined. It's really just, this is the culmination of 10 years of quote unquote clinical work in the trenches with tens of thousands of people that we've coached in their day-to-day productivity. And we've just found that this is the simplest that we could make it. And there's really 5 steps. Step 1, there's a step 0, if I may. Step 0 is what we call remove the resistance. And I call it step 0 because if you do it once and you do it right, you'll never have to do it again. It's really like a foundational, like this is a setup that you have to do. And it really is what we just spoke about, which is to set up a planning process that induces you to want to do it, where the reward of doing the planning exceeds the avoidance that you have around the planning. And if you do that once and you do it right, you'll never have to do it again. Okay, so that's step 0. Step 1 is to learn a lesson. In any practice in life, whether it's guitar or piano, you want to do intentional, effortful improvement, right? Effortful practice, effortful improvement means that you didn't just practice piano, you actually listened back to a bit of your session and said, okay, that's actually something that I'm doing wrong. Let me improve on that. And with just 5 minutes in your planning practice, if you take 5 minutes before you start and you say, okay, how did last week go? What's one thing I did right? What's one thing I did wrong? What's something I should keep doing, right? And if you bring that and you fold that into your practice, not with we're not talking about 50 minutes. I'm just talking about a really quick reflection on learning one lesson. What you'll find is that your improvement process starts to go exponential because now you're implementing effortful practice, effortful improvement. You've created a learning loop, an improvement loop that quickly compounds. So that's step 1. Learn a lesson, integrate it, compound your improvement. Step 2 is we always jump into people's priorities. And we always say, find one leveraged priority. And by leverage, what we really mean is the classic Gary Keller, Jay Papasan definition of leverage. What is something that I could do this week that doesn't just get things done? It doesn't get people off my back. It's actually something that will make every week and every month easier in the future. And when you bring leverage to your life, again, it compounds, right? If I do something for the next 52 weeks that makes my life consistently easier, imagine how much easier my life is going to feel a year from now with 52 weeks of targeting things that are going to make my life permanently easier, make things unnecessary. That alone, those 2 things alone, implement some kind of lesson learned and find leverage and implement leverage and prioritize leverage in your week. If you stop there already, you'd be ahead of the pack. The next thing we do in our planning process is we actually scan your calendar. And I do what we call interrogation of calendar, meaning instead of just a calendar review, we actually really step through with a harsh interrogation, like a spotlight. We really analyze our calendar, not just for the next 7 days, but for the next 14 days. So if you're looking at your calendar harshly every 7 days with a rolling 14-day glance, what you're going to do is you're never going to get taken by surprise. Right? When we're not scanning our calendar right, or we're just doing a casual review, or we're not looking out 14 days, what happens is we tend to get taken by surprise by things. And this is what I call the stupid tax, the unforced errors, where you slap yourself in the face and you say, God, I should have caught that. And now I'm going to pay a huge price in time and stress and anxiety. And in fact, I'll pause for all those managers out there, because I know that's primarily who's listening. If you just, in your entire team, removed the stupid problems, the problems that could have been foreseen, right? The landmines that you could have scanned, your team will, on a compounding base, operate so much better. Because often when you get these landmines, these emergencies that takes the whole team off their game, because Sally didn't foresee something coming down the pike, and then it occurs to her as an emergency, and now she sends up the red flare and says, "Everybody, please stop and help me, because now this thing I should have caught 14 days out, since I didn't, now it's an emergency, and it doesn't just affect me. I'm pulling in my whole team." Does that make sense?
Yes, it really does. And it's so true that like these things are often like, flares going up and fires that need to get put out wouldn't necessarily need all of that attention if we were thoughtful and if we were looking ahead and if we were projecting and then, making the right moves up front.
My experience is, and this is very rough numbers, But the vast majority of quote unquote emergencies that teams face were what I call unnecessary emergencies, meaning they could have been foreseen, they could have been mitigated in a massive way. And so if 80 or 70% of your emergencies are unnecessary, that doesn't mean you don't still have things that no matter what you've done, you could not have foreseen this. Well, great. Now you have so much time and energy and intention to face those emergencies. There's nothing worse than a week when you had 5 unnecessary emergencies that compound the 6th and 7th necessary emergency. That's those nightmare weeks where you really, you just really get grounded and pounded. Okay. Step 4 is then we go to your to-do list. We scan your to-do list and we triage your tasks, almost like a triage doctor. Triage doctors cannot, if you're on the front lines of a battle and you've got mass casualties, the truth is you can't help everybody. And Napoleon's doctors in the Napoleonic Wars realized that they were actually letting more people die overall by trying to treat everybody, meaning your attempt to treat every patient is actually resulting in more death and sickness overall. And so the courageous thing is to actually create a classification system and say, how can I do the most good? And take the hard medicine that doing the most good often means courageously deciding what's going to die ahead of time. And that's so hard emotionally to look at something and say, I'm not going to get that project to that person. This is not going to happen. This person's going to have to get disappointed so that I can do more good overall. That's step 4. And then finally, step 5 is calendarizing, marrying them together. Once you have your time supply and your time's demands, you really need to bring them together and prepare yourself. Take a very deep, courageous breath. What that really means is that it means allocating every single 30-minute increment of your week to a purpose. A very important principle of the winning the week method is that if you say that you're going to do something, that you also allocate the specific time and place when you're going to do it. That doesn't mean you can't switch it. That doesn't mean you can't trade. It just means that what I used to do, maybe in my old life, is I used to have this huge open calendar and a giant to-do list. And I hoped that somehow at the end of the week that they would balance out. Spoiler alert, they never did, right? I always ended up chasing the long tail of my tasks into infinity and running out of time and not having gotten the important things done. So a critical principle is to actually take something off your to-do list and put it in your calendar and say, this big important project, or even just this email processing session, it's going to happen on this time at this day. So that's the 5 steps of the winning the week method. Really, it's as simple as that. 5 simple steps. And if you've covered those 5 steps, you're going to have a winning plan for the week, guaranteed.
Oh my gosh, I love this. And I am so glad that we got through these 5 steps. And I'm really excited for people to get your book and to learn more because we are now out of time. So Demir, can you tell us about a great manager that you worked for and what made this person such a fantastic boss?
Okay, this is going to seem like a really silly response, but it is genuinely my honest answer. Before we were romantically involved, my wife was my boss. It's true. We did a partnership with her company and they put her in charge of us. And she was the one running the meetings and making sure the trains ran on time. And I remember thinking before, I didn't even know what she looked like. She was just a disembodied voice on the phone. And I remember thinking, damn, this woman can run a meeting. I have never seen someone run a better meeting than this woman. And I remember looking to my left and my right, and like, have you ever been in a better meeting? She really just, with zero ego, she just made sure that everybody was prepared. She cut people off if they were starting to get into the story, but it never felt that she was trying to put people down. And she was always nursing the project forward. Her questions were always insightful. She could always smell the BS. It just felt like she was the perfect balance of somebody who made the trains run on time without making it about her. And it never felt personal and it never felt emotional. And that's actually, and I'll just raise my hand and say, I was the CEO of a company before this company and had a big team. And I was really poor at it as a really poor manager. And it's interesting because it's really interesting to have been in charge of many people. It gives you a newfound respect and you can really appreciate when you see somebody doing it the right way.
Wow. And amazing that you got to marry her. So it's such a lovely story.
Yeah, I joke that I liked the position of employee so much that I made it permanent. Now I'm her permanent employee.
Amazing. And where can people learn more about you and keep up with your work?
Yeah, I think what's most important right now is that we've got this book coming out, Winning the Week, which is the culmination of 10 years of this work that we've done in the trenches with over, at this point, I can't believe it, 50,000 people that we've gotten a chance to interface with. So it's not just some productivity idea that we sort of dreamed up in our garage. It's actually the result of a lot of work that we've done and that our clients have done. And we're trying to bring it back and sort of release it into the broader world. So check that out at winningtheweek.com. That's winningtheweek.com. And if you're too itchy, if you don't like books or you're too itchy and you want to get it sooner, we also have a hour-long video training on that process, again, at winningtheweek.com.
Well, thank you so much again for joining me today. Super fascinating conversation. I'm definitely going to make some changes to my weekly planning process. So I appreciate all that you shared today.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
Demir is providing 20 members of the Modern Manager community a free Kindle version of his book, Winning the Week. This book dives into detail on the 5-step method that we reviewed that radically reimagines how you plan and execute your week. This offer is available to members of the Modern Manager community at the Sprout level and above. To join, go to themodernmanager.com/join. And even if the Sprout level isn't right for you, I highly encourage you to join at the Seed level, which is at $5 per month, where you get the extended interviews. Demir and I talk about when is the optimal time to do the weekly plan and how to do it with your team to really supercharge it. You can listen to the full interview only if you're a member. Again, that site is themodernmanager.com/join. As usual, all the links are in the show notes and they can be delivered to your inbox when you subscribe to my newsletter. Find that at themodernmanager.com. Thanks again for listening. Until next time.
Meetings are one of the most critical components of healthy collaboration, and teams are at the heart of how we work. Meteor helps you use your time in meetings productively, build healthy relationships with your colleagues, and move work forward. To learn how we do it, visit meteor.com. That's MEETEOR.com.
You've been listening to The Modern Manager. You're already becoming a rock star boss of a thriving team, I can tell. To ensure you never miss an episode, subscribe to the show in your favorite podcast player and join the mailing list at mamieks.com/podcast. That's MAMIEKS.com/podcast to get show notes and other special content delivered directly to your inbox. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.